Welcome. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right, free to download. With built-in tools to help you record and edit your podcast from your cell phone or any smart device. Anchor also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and many more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is your one-stop app for podcasting. Remember, it's free. Go to anchor.fm to create some amazing content. Welcome to the TaeKwonDo Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations. We exchange a ton of information, and we have lots of resources available to anybody that's going to be listening and or watching this podcast. Yes, we are streaming on all major platforms. We also do video available options. So if you want to watch any of our episodes, you can go to Spotify or you can go to our YouTube channel, Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. Let me get all the housekeeping stuff out of the way because we got a very esteemed guest in the building for part 3. That's right, part 3 of our Stigmas, Taboos, and Stereotypes segment featuring Leah Abraham. I want to tell you that during this podcast, we're going to have some very important information. We're coming from a worldwide perspective in this particular episode. So if you are triggered at any point during this podcast, and I mean at any point, and you need immediate help because the information that we're going to be sharing is serious, there's no therapy done on this podcast. I'm going to say it again. There's absolutely no therapy done on this podcast. We want you to call 911. That starts the recording process. It starts the mandated reporters to do what they're mandated to do per their licensure. And it also gives you help from EMS, police, or fire if there is an immediate emergency. If you don't have an immediate need, but you still need help, we still provide other sources of information. So if you are suicidal, know somebody that's suicidal, call 988. That number is available 24/7. Again, it's 988, and that's available here in the U.S. If you have other issues that you need help with, substance abuse, it could be alcohol or drugs, we provide the numbers to 3 sources. If you are a supporter of someone who has a substance abuse issue, we have the number to Al-Anon. If you have alcohol issues, we have AA. If you have drug issues, we provide the number and website to NA. Of course, we also provide information to a lot of the topics that we cover. So we have the numbers and websites to the Domestic Violence Hotline, RAIN, which is Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and also we have the numbers to the Trafficking Hotline. So that being said, I want to just jump right into our special guest. Her name is Dr. Rosenna Bakari. She's a scholar, a motivational speaker, a social advocate. She earned her Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Northern Colorado. She got her master's in counseling from the State University of New York, SUNY, and her undergraduate degree in psychology from Cornell University. As a psychologist, writer, black belt, spoken word artist, and she's a marathon finisher. Dr. Bakari has always loved writing and wrote her first book while she was a stay-at-home parent in '94. Her poetry collection consists of over 150 poems, and she enjoys participating in open mic events. I can't wait to hear those, Dr. Bakari, one day. She has 15 years of training in TaeKwonDo, which I did that as a teenager. She finds her mental strength through training her physical body and uses her writing to support others in their healing journey. And she is the founder and executive director of Talking Trees Incorporated, an empowerment organization for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Dr. Rosenna Bakari, I am so honored and thankful to have you on the show on the TaeKwonDo Talk podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I am doing well. It's a good day always to talk about things that are unspeakable that we don't hear a lot of conversation around. So thank you for having me.
Dr. Bakari, I got chill bumps right now. Like literally, you can't see them on the screen. But here's why: because we've been working on getting you on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast for a cool minute, and I appreciate your time. So we're just going to kind of jump right into it because we're going to be putting together this massive episode, and you're going to be part of it. Leah Abraham, our beloved friend, she's going to be part of it, and we got one more person that we're working on that's going to complete the picture. We are talking about stigmas, taboos, and stereotypes, world childhood domestic violence and traumas. Your expertise is in so many things. And I love when I hear you in rooms that Leah hosts because you just bring the funk. You bring it like nobody brings it. And you are one of the foremost experts in your field. So I want to give you a chance to say anything else in terms of introducing yourself that I didn't say that you'd like the audience to know about you. And then we're just going to jump right into the topic.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Larry. Yeah, you did a pretty good job. I appreciate that. I'm an empowerment expert, and I started uh, working with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse in 2010, before people were really talking about it at all. The reason I started working in that area was because no one was talking about it at all, and I had begun living openly as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and found great difficulty in finding relevant information. And so, fortunately, I have access to research. I'm a researcher, so I have access, and found that there was so much information out there that I could access that I knew the majority of survivors could not. And so I really just started working to disseminate information for adult survivors that were critical for their healing journey and their peace of mind. So that's how I got into the work. And of course, the work always evolves. And one of the things I realized pretty quickly was that it was a gender bias phenomenon. While, yes, there are many men who are survivors, what we also know, though, is that that females are overwhelmingly the victims and males are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. That's does not dismiss at all the pain and agony of being a survivor, regardless of gender. But when we look at oppression of women around the world, knowing that statistic is pretty important. It can't be ignored. So I've been doing the work for a long time.
Yes, you have. And we appreciate all your academic work because, you know, when I talk to a lot of the men that I work with weekly, they feel like they're too scared to have to say anything about the traumas that they've dealt with, growing up. It's affected them even to this day. I talk about my own family. I have no problem talking about some of the issues that some of the members of my family deal with. I have an uncle who is in his 60s and he was traumatized as a kid, just so heavily. And to this day, he has not sought help. He uses other things to help him, substances and stuff. And, I think at this point, I would say that he's not going to even consider doing anything to, seek some positive help. He's not doing anything as far as Western medicine, in terms of talking to a therapist or a psychiatrist. He's not using any metaphysical modalities, Reiki or NLP or cognitive behavior. I believe EMDR would be phenomenal for him for the traumas that he experienced as a youth. But, we just have to keep pressing on because we know everybody is not ready for seeking help officially. The first thing you have to do is acknowledge it and then say, hey, I want help, and then go about the process of finding help. For you, being a clinician with patients, what do you say to men who fear seeking help?
Well, I'll say that I understand why it's so difficult. Not we understand the gender issue with males seeking help, but there's also a deeper issue here. That is that when you have had trauma perpetrated against you in childhood, you don't get a chance to develop normalcy. You don't know what healthy is. When you become an expert at survival, and most survivors do, we become an expert at survival. We don't need our life to be perfect. We don't even know what that looks like, perfect or normal. What we do know is that we know how to survive. Even if it's not healthy survival, we know how to survive. We put
Yes.
a lot of eggs in that basket. And so asking someone to get help when they don't know what help, what better looks like or feels like because they've never been there, is a challenge. And so particularly for men more so than women, it makes it more difficult because men have other ways to get power in this world. So when men, for example, are sexually abused, they become more vulnerable to sexual abuse like women do. However, it looks different. Is it's easier to fake power as a male. It's easier to fake power. So it's a little more challenging to do that as a woman, because men get a piece of that power pie. And so that's even harder to give up because I can get a job, or I can get a woman or two women or five women. I can fake it a little bit better. So it takes a little bit more for me to come out of my bag and show some vulnerability that is only reserved for women in the country, right? Or in the world. Vulnerability is reserved for women or for weak people. And as a man, that's not the role that I play. So we first have to have some compassion for the complexity and the difficulty in which men have to go through to even seek help. That's not the survivor's fault. That's society's problem. That's
Okay.
not the survivor's problem. That's society's problem. When we don't lay the groundwork for anyone to come out of survival mode and hold space for their state of vulnerability, we can't keep blaming the victim for what they're not doing. We as a society have to offer safe spaces, not keep asking people to come out and live in a jungle of persecution as soon as you say something about some vulnerable state that you're in.
That gives me a great segue into the first thing I want us to talk about: female genital mutilation. Dr. Bakari, I went and I just Googled genital mutilation in the US because we're talking from a worldwide perspective. So I always want to start at home. Let's start at home. I type on the screen for those that are going to be watching. So please watch this interview because you miss some of these, tools and some of these slides that I pull up when I'm interviewing. Sometimes if you're just listening on the audio, I just Googled genital mutilation in the US and I got all kind of stuff that popped up from different organizations, from some government sites. The CDC has a few links on there. Can you explain what female genital mutilation actually is?
Ooh, in a nutshell, it is because it can be several. There's several ways for me to answer that question. So I'm trying to first answer it in the most objective way. It's the cutting of the clitoris, and the reason you would want to do that, or the reason some people want to do that, is often for religious. Is connected to some sort of religious purpose to curb the sexual appetite of girls, to make sure to prepare them for their life of fidelity toward their eventual partner. So that's the gist of it. There's a whole lot goes on around that. I am sensitive to bashing, if you will, people's religious commitments. At the
Absolutely.
same time, the World Health Organization has banned female genital mutilation. We know that it's not a safe practice, and we also can have some deep discussions about why such a practice would ever even come in place to begin with. This whole idea that female sexuality belongs to men is really a deep discussion that has to at some point go beyond religion, go beyond culture, go beyond all these things that reasons that we feel like women are not entitled to bodily autonomy.
We're going to put the religious part on the shelf for right now. We'll address that at a later time in a later episode, because that in and of itself is a very intricate conversation that, again, as you stated so eloquently, we want to be very respectful of everybody's religious beliefs. And we know that may be part of that. However, it does need to be addressed and talked about. So we're going to put that to the side for right now. We're going to put a pin in that.
Okay,
Let's talk about,
fair
let's
enough.
talk, let's talk about the cultural aspect real quick, because I want to talk about the cultural aspect, and I want to talk about the aspect from another one of your point of views that I'm going to bring up after that. So let's talk about it from a cultural standpoint. Here in the U.S., how does it differ from what's happening worldwide, if any?
I don't think there. I don't think that it is different. I think people in the U.S. do it for the same reasons that people do it worldwide, but it's banned. It's not legal to do it, as far as my understanding is. The World Health Organization banned it some years ago, but people continue to do it and submit young girls to it out of some reasoning and rationality around that, or that strips them from bodily autonomy. It's a very painful practice. It's a very unnecessary practice. It's a very oppressive practice of female sexuality.
Yeah, because I'm looking on the CDC.gov's website, and again, I just typed in female genital mutilation. They say, according to the World Health Organization, that as many as 200 million girls worldwide, 200 million girls and women have experienced female genital mutilation / cutting. And the researchers from the CDC estimate that as many as half a million girls and women in the United States have undergone FGM/C in the past, or may be at risk for undergoing it in the future. And so, although that it's often viewed as part of the culture in countries where it's practiced, it has no health benefits. In fact, it can lead to immediate and long-term health problems. It can affect obstetrics, gynecological, sexual, or psychological health. You know what I always think about? I'm a retired paramedic and a firefighter. I retired in 2020 after being on the front line as a COVID medic, and I got into EMS in 2006. I always think about the lack of training that we as first responders have in regard to some of these 911 calls we respond to, because I can tell you I've gone on thousands and thousands of 911 calls where it came out as an obstetric, a gynecological, a sexual, and psychological healthcare emergencies. I never thought to ask if that young girl or that woman had been traumatized by female genital mutilation when she said she was having pain in her vagina, or she had trauma to that. It was a taboo thing even for us, especially me being a guy that was not really educated on these things. And so I'm like, what can I do to either give you some pain management medication, give you some gauze or something like that to stop the bleeding? Because even in a situation like that, unless you're having a baby right then and there, I don't even want to see it. I only want to, what I mean? Like, keep your pants up, get your dress down. Like, what hospital you want to go to? Let's go. So for even first responders, and that's in part why we're doing the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, is to educate other first responders on things that they may come across. Because again, we're mandated reporters. You can't just say, oh, I'm gonna call my supervisor and I'm done. No, you have to call and report cases of child abuse, sex abuse, elder abuse, stuff like that. You have to report those things. You can't just tell your supervisor, and your supervisor can't just tell you no. And I say that specifically because, as a reminder, there's still some first responders that I've heard over the course of my career that don't report things. And I want to eliminate that because that can put them at risk of losing their license. As far as female genital mutilation, what has been your experience in talking about it, educating people on it, all the above?
Yeah, I always include it when I talk about sexual violation, and particularly when I'm talking about the topic of bodily autonomy, because that's all the things that you cover. It falls under the umbrella of bodily autonomy, and the lack of autonomy, the lack of choice for women to make decisions about their own bodies, starting at a very young age. Female genital mutilation takes place somewhere around 4 to 14. We're not talking about an infant that's not going to remember or doesn't know what's going on, which is bad in and of itself. But we're talking about taking a child that's already learned to walk and talk and negotiate the world, and is now going to be strapped down and have a piece of her cut off by someone who's not a physician. No doctors doing this.
Wow.
And it's often sometimes a very crude procedure done by someone not in a medical profession. And so it's very traumatizing. And so 4 years of age, 8 years of age, 14 years of age, depending on the culture and the reason that you're doing it. But the bottom line is that from a very early age, just like most people don't realize that the average age of childhood sexual abuse is 11 years old. The fact that from girlhood, girls through womanhood do not have a sense that they get to make their own decisions about their body is such an important conversation that we must have. We must have bodily autonomy in every situation. We can't get rid of adult rape if we can't understand the right to bodily autonomy. The reason adult rape is 1% conviction rate is because we don't have conversations about what it means to have autonomy over your own body as a woman. We've been stripped of that for a very, very long time. So that's how we get all this mess and all these violations that come in different forms to women, because we don't have conversations about bodily autonomy. So female genital mutilation is one more expression of the lack of bodily autonomy.
I'm on this website called womenshealth.gov. It's a government site that is a link from the CDC's website, and it talks about female genital mutilation or cutting, and it gives some very specific, it asks some very specific questions, and it gives you a lot of answers. And one of the things I was looking at was, what does FGM/C affect a girl or woman's health immediately after cutting? And, when I'm looking at this thing, I go back to the stuff that I do and other paramedics and EMTs focus on when they get emergency calls, because again, the call can come out as anything. It's not going to come out as a genital mutilation call. It's going to come out as a vaginal bleed or OB issue or GYN issue or something like that. It might just come out as unknown EMS call. We get that a lot. And then we get there and it's like, oh my God, like it could be anything from A to Z. And, it talks about severe pain and bleeding and serious bleeding and infection to the wounds, traumas from the girls being held down against their will. They might not understand why. They might have problems going to the bathroom afterwards. They may have tetanus and other infectious diseases such as HIV, or even up to death. With you in your practice and your knowledge, when we're talking about just the physical health aspects and the traumas. What are you saying to people about these particular things? Because that has to be a public health crisis.
Right, it is. This is something that is extremely quiet. It's such a cultural practice that generally people who are in a culture, an American culture that undergo this practice are probably pretty ingrained in those cultures and are not talking about it. It's not an easy it's unlikely that people are coming across it directly. What I tend to come across adults who've had this done now are having some grief as an adult about their bodies. And so, in terms of the counseling profession, it's important to be able to have that question when you know that people, particularly, have moved here from outside of the United States, is often where it's likely to come up, and people are having issues, and you hear something about cutting or their genitals or being fixed or fidelity to their partners that's forced, then you might want to bring up the question of female genital mutilation. Is there an experience of that? But then the other piece becomes, for women who have had that experience, is really, again, empowering them to understand that they have a right to decide what happens to their bodies from here on out. That's not that's a lot to psychologically address and deal with when you talk about to people about defying what they have come to believe and rely on their entire lives, without having to make compromises to who they are, and helping them address the psychological effect of undergoing such a procedure. It's complicated.
You know, Dr. Bakari, one of the things I want to ask you about specifically when it comes to cultures, which cultures typically are the ones that are involved in this practice historically and till today?
Yeah, historically, some of the Middle Eastern cultures, Egyptians, maybe some of the Nigerian cultures, but oftentimes more so from the continent of Africa. I'm not sure how pervasive it is in like India or some of the Asian cultures, but oftentimes it's associated with some of the African cultures.
Regarding let's go to the psychiatric mindset. How does this affect women and girls in particular, those that identify as such, who have experienced female genital mutilation or cutting? What are some of the things that you know of as an expert that they deal with post procedure?
Yeah, and again, I'm dealing with women who have had this procedure done as girls, and so even as women, they're trying to address sexuality. One, especially if they're now, for example, dating men outside of that culture, and they're looking at issues of intimacy and having to explain what has happened to them, or dealing with the effects of how to then achieve sexual pleasure that doesn't center around this body part that you don't have, that was designed for sexual pleasure. And so conversations become more convoluted or complex around sexuality and how to become attached to your own body and begin to live in your own body, because this is your body, and not let culture or religion or something else outside of you make decisions about what your body should look like or feel like, or how sexuality should be expressed, that you get to make those decisions for yourself. Mm-hmm. That's a difficult conversation because people have not been given permission to do that. So again, it's always a tricky, careful conversation to have with people when you're trying to guide them outside of their cultural understandings. It's a sensitive topic.
What do you say to a woman who may be a client of yours that comes into your office and in the course of your conversation, she says, I am a survivor of genital mutilation? What's the process of helping her heal?
First, they would never say they're a survivor of genital mutilation, right? It's a cultural practice. No more than you would say you're a survivor of baptism. Like it's like really understand, and this is why it's such a sensitive topic.
That's why I asked, because I'm like, what do they say? I'm just kind of winging it.
Right.
How would I approach it if I'm a woman who that happened to? How would I say it? Like, that's why I'm asking.
Right. And so they would likely be expressing an issue around their current issue around their sexuality.
Okay.
And they would just reveal that this is something that has happened to them. What they often don't even know how to express what the consequences has been. So they just want to know how to feel like a normal woman sexually, a woman who doesn't have this experience. Like they just want to know, questions like, am I still a woman? Okay. What does this mean? Those sorts of things they're trying to sort out, but they're trying to sort it out and at the same time do their best to hold on to their cultural beliefs, and people and tradition. So that's really tricky for them. It's really complex.
Dr. Bakari, thank you so much for letting us know about these things, because it's something that I've never had a conversation with. In EMS, we all work under the license of a medical doctor. I've been in EMS since 2006. Never, ever, 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 ever had a conversation about female genital mutilation and what do you do if you come across a patient who has some medical issue in a 911 situation as a result of that. Because when I come out, I got to do an assessment, a thorough, full differential diagnosis in the field. And we run into people, all genders, all ethnicities, all religious beliefs, all of that stuff. So there have been times where we do get training on certain things to be aware of culturally. Like if you put your hand on top of someone's head who may be Eastern Asian, that's a sign of disrespect. If you cross your legs and you show the bottom of your soles of your foot, that's a sign of disrespect. Giving a thumbs up in some cultures is a sign of disrespect. So many different things. There are situations that I've been aware of that the guy's doing all the talking. So my red flags and antennas will start going up. But I understand that culturally, that's how it is with them. It's not a trafficking situation, but that's something that I have to be aware of because we learned that in one trafficking class that I've had, and that was in 2019. And so when we're having these conversations about these things, I wouldn't even know where to begin if I had that be a patient of mine. If I had a situation like that where a patient of mine experienced something like that. And so that's, again, part of my goal is to talk to all these medical directors for these fire services that have firefighters and medics like I worked for, or just EMS services that are standalone, because I work for a private EMS service also, in addition to working for a fire department that had medics on staff, and we had our own ambulances too. And when we're talking about, and I'm going to ask you one more question about it, because again, this is such a complex conversation. We just don't have the time right now. My last question to you is, let's go to the worldwide point of view. How is it being handled in terms of the laws? Because we know that in the United States it's illegal. According to this site, the womenshealth.org, .gov, it says that it's illegal in most countries around the world, including many of the countries in which it's regularly practiced. For you as an educator, are you speaking to worldwide groups, organizations, programs to bring about more awareness and advocacy for the discontinuation of this practice?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. That's not my platform. Maybe one day I will, but generally that is not my platform to do. But the World Health Organization has made it extremely clear to countries that this is not a good practice, that we should not be practicing that. Again, I think the conversation that we have to have in order to really stop that is a conversation about bodily autonomy. Otherwise, it's like telling somebody to telling the US to stop using Christmas trees because it kills too many trees. I mean, we know that, but it's such a cultural practice that it'll take something more than that where people feel connected to losing trees or whatever and stuff. So, and I'm saying that to say this is how common a practice is. I mean, we see it as dangerous. We see the offense of it, but there has to be a conversation about what it means to have bodily autonomy and why females around the world do not. This is a bigger issue than just you shouldn't do this to young girls.
I want you to expound on that. The mic is yours.
Okay. So, right. And so for the last 200,000 years, pretty much, we'll say at least the last 100,000 years, increasingly around the world, women have not had bodily autonomy, and we really don't have time to go over the whole history of it. But basically what that means is that men have been in control of women's bodies for at least the last 100,000 years around the world. You mentioned some of those practices in your introduction, when we talk about not just female genital mutilation, which started about 100,000 years ago. It's been going on for a long time. I mean, not quite that long, but it's been going on for a very long time. Early cultures. That's why the practice is still going on in some places like Egypt. We know that Egypt is one of the oldest practices, and that's one of the early practices. So this has been going on for a very long time. But along with female genital mutilation, there's also been marrying girls off. Fathers get to decide who their daughters marry. There's also, we know, human trafficking, which is boys and girls, but a lot of that has to do with taking girls at a young age. So this practice of controlling the female life from birth, literally from birth until death, from birth until you marry her off and somebody else gives her away. Even in the American culture, this idea of a father giving away his daughter still exists. We all buy into this idea that the daughter belonged to the father, and now the father gives her to another man. That's the only right way to do it, right? Anything outside of that is somehow sinful or something else that's unacceptable. And so in all ways, in so many ways, the message is clear that women do not have control. We won't even talk about abortion rights, but because it falls under here too. But the bottom line is that women do not get to say what happens to their bodies. Men dictate what happened to women's bodies. Your brother does, your father does, the priest does, the uncle, whoever is in charge of that community or whatever, get to control or get to say what is going to happen to women's bodies. So female genital mutilation is one more rule invented by men to determine how to guarantee that this girl will be a virgin when she gets to her proper husband, and then she'll serve him. For longest time, men could not be charged of rape against their wives, right? That's been changed recently, within recent years. So there's numerous evidence that builds up that makes it very clear that men are in control of women's bodies. So women do not have bodily autonomy. We can even talk about the beauty industry, what women keep doing to their bodies to please men, because people keep telling us what men want. Men want this, so do this. Men want big booties. Okay, then make your booty. Men want big lips. Okay, men want. Women do. Women are constantly subjected to the whims of men and have been for the longest time. When I mentioned conviction rate 1%, because this again is also tied up into the notion that women are somehow responsible for men's desires. So that's what I mean when I say bodily autonomy. Female genital mutilation is one aspect.
Okay.
So that's also why I'm a little bit careful and hesitant about how I talk about female genital mutilation, because it's only one piece. It's only
Sure.
one piece. There's a lot of things tied to the lack of bodily autonomy for women. And so we don't have the liberty of looking at one piece as if all these other pieces don't exist.
Give me your top 5 things that you would like to let the audience know. And we'll be talking about this at a later time more in depth. But what's your top 5 things that you would like people to know or do their own research? Because y'all got smart devices. Y'all can Google all this breaking news stuff or whatever. We ain't going to get into all that. However, what would you say that you would like people to start looking at in terms of doing their own research in regards to bodily autonomy?
I would like people to understand the ages in which assault of some sort is perpetrated against females.
Okay.
I want us to understand that, because when we raise these issues, it always sounds like some grown woman is just, here we go again. I want them to understand and look up the average age of childhood sexual abuse. And so we always talk about it in like these short bursts where it looks like somebody's just complaining. We don't get at the seriousness of it. But how are you going to increase the conviction for adult rape when we can't get a conviction for child rape? When we have, for example, 13-year-olds getting pregnant by 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and no one ever goes to jail, ever. I mean, right?
Right.
And so I want people to understand what happens to girls. If we don't understand what happened to girls, it's really difficult to be compassionate about what happens to women. It takes place at such a young age, but that by the time we're women, we're just participating in it unconsciously. So when we hear women speak, we don't believe them. We dismiss them. We have to, because we haven't addressed what happened to girls. Again, female genital mutilation, average age, I think, is somewhere around 4 years of age. Childhood sexual abuse, I think, average somewhere around 11 years of age. Now, when we talk about the cosmetic surgeries, the girls are getting it for their 12th and 13th birthday, right? They want bigger boobs. They want this, they want that. I mean, it's just bizarre. Watch what is happening to our young girls in order to understand what women are complaining about. But what women say can't matter, won't matter until we really understand how early this is happening to girls. So that's one thing I want to say. Whatever problem women are having, look and see when it starts, right?
So
that's really important for bodily autonomy and understanding that. 2, I want us to understand that if we're going to advocate for bodily autonomy, everything has to go in the pot. We don't get to say we're going to make our own decisions, and so we don't want female genital mutilation, but the public is going to make a decision about whether or not a baby comes through this canal. Bodily autonomy is bodily autonomy. Either we're going to advocate for it or we're not. Do we have a right to say so, to say what we want to do with our bodies? So I want us to understand even deeper what it means to have bodily autonomy. And I want us to commit to fighting for, advocating for, talking about bodily autonomy, and look at women's lives from the perspective of bodily autonomy. So, for example, what would happen if women felt safe in the world because people understood that women have a right to bodily autonomy. And what does it mean then for women to be safe in the world? Oh, can you imagine a world? What would we do, women, if we felt safe in the world? If we could go out after dark, if we could, we can't, we don't even trust going to the bathroom by ourselves,
Yeah.
right? That's how ingrained it is now. And so, and that's because we have lost sight of our need for bodily autonomy. So we're fighting for higher pay, we're fighting for better jobs, we're fighting for childcare, but we're not fighting for bodily autonomy, which is the foundation of all of it. Another thing that has to do with it is about sexual pleasure. I don't know, maybe this is 3 or 4, I don't know. Sexual pleasure. Look up, if you don't yet understand, the orgasm gap. This is another issue of bodily autonomy and women's right to be in control of what happens to their own body, and serving their own body and not using their bodies for the pleasure of men exclusively, right? So look up the orgasm gap, the difference between male orgasm and female orgasm. It's two people in here. Why is only one person coming out with the ultimate pleasure? And then you have women who say orgasm doesn't matter to me. What? Your body is a mean, lean machine capable of that. Again, this is part of our internalization about what it means to live in this body and for me to claim it as my own. So that's another issue that's so related to bodily autonomy that we don't talk about, we don't address. None of these issues do we put on the table, right? We keep talking about equal pay, equal pay, equal pay. To do what? Please men more? To do what? Look more like men say we should look, to do to escape from the pain that's caused from the lack of bodily autonomy. It has to start with having full ownership from top to bottom. And then I think this might be number 5 for bodily autonomy is understand that you have a responsibility to protect yourself from head to toe. You have a right and you have a responsibility. Again, we're not told that. We're told, so yeah, when he punches her in the eye, she's taught not to respond because no one ever said you should respond. When they back you in a corner, no one has ever said you should respond. Here's the last example, and then I'm going to shut up. If you're in a bar and and this is one of the examples I use, and I'm trying to get people to understand. If you're in a bar and there are 2 men in there, and a man looks at a man and says, "I think you want to go home with me tonight," and puts his hand on that man's leg, what's that man going to do? He's going to go off. He's going to punch him. He's going to do whatever. And everybody in that bar is going to get it. They're going to get it. So why is it different when a man does it to a woman and the woman gives an evil look or just slaps the hand or says something? Then everybody in the bar says what? She's a bitch.
Oh my God. Yeah.
No bodily autonomy, because we've settled that women do not have the right to protect themselves, right? And so that's the last thing I'll say about that. So protecting yourself, you have the right and the responsibility to protect yourself from head to toe unapologetically. So those are the things I would say as they relate to bodily autonomy.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, where we are produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We are streaming on all major platforms, and we also provide video interviews via Spotify and our YouTube channel, which is Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We're talking with Dr. Rosenna Bakari. We're going to be wrapping up real soon because it's so much to talk about, so little time. Let's move on to arranged marriages. For you, what say you about the practice of arranged marriages starting here in the States? Is it legal? Is it illegal? What do you say about that?
I don't think it's if I get my statistics right, there's 2 things. If you're talking about arranged marriage over the age of 16, I believe it's still legal. And it depends on whether it's a child involved or not. If it's a child involved, then it's still childhood abuse or childhood sexual abuse. There should be no argument about it. If it's over age and people consent to it, again, there's nothing wrong with that. And there is some research that suggests that arranged marriages last as long as marriages where people choose each other. It's still an issue of bodily autonomy. Once it crosses the line that this person, this woman, did not get to choose who she was going to be with, that is problematic. That's what we're just saying. All these issues come under bodily autonomy. This idea that women are put here for the service of men, right? And so they don't get to make choices about their body. And we've been living with under those rules for way too long, way too long. And so if it's two adults that have agreed to arrange marriage and they've given up their right to self-select and they've done that willingly, hey, I'm good for it. Otherwise, the rule is bodily autonomy. It's simple. Everybody deserves bodily autonomy.
It just goes back to that. And that, I'm telling you, in and of itself, I really did not have any idea how deep that topic is. I mean, because you can go in all kind of directions with it. It ties into so many things. When we think about what's going on here, specifically in the U.S., with a lot of women, young girls are going to either they're going to some of these foreign countries or they're having these surgeries done here in the U.S. And, you get a lot of, when I have these conversations, a lot of times some of the negative stuff that I hear that's being thrown at me is women have the right to do whatever they want to do with their body. So I don't have a problem with that. We're not talking about that in terms of I have no problem with what you do with your body as a woman. Period, point blank, no ands, ifs, or buts. That's it. That's all. We're talking about the imagery, why you're doing these things. What's the cause? What's the effect? What are you doing? Are you robbing Peter to pay Paul for a bigger butt? Or are you, putting yourself out there in terms of because you feel insignificant, because maybe you grew up as a slim person and wanted to be more voluptuous, or you grew up maybe in a situation where obesity was rampant in your family and you wanted to maybe not have that be an issue with you. And I know sometimes some of the women that I've talked to have said, I was a fat girl, and I had all this fat moved to my hips and to my chest and all of this stuff. And now I'm looking like the bomb.com and all these things or whatever. And I say again, if it's not affecting you negatively, you do what you want to do with your body. For those that are doing it to please other people, like you were saying earlier, when we're talking about this, would you consider that body dysmorphia, or like, am I using the right words?
Yeah, that's a relevant word here, where you have a distorted view of your body,
Yeah.
right? So I agree with you. You can do whatever you want with your body. Hey, I put on makeup, right? Because I don't want to be seen like I just walked out of bed, got up out of bed. So there's a bunch of versions, like you're saying. It's what is the psychological impact? What are you doing it for? What do you want the ultimate outcome to be? And it's not so much what people do, even it's what gets promoted. What people do is what people do. I will support people's rights to do whatever they want to do that's not harming other people, but it's what's promoted. What are people encouraged to do? And what do people feel like based on what they're encouraged to do? So when you're encouraged to sexualize yourself everywhere you turn, every social media, every song, every video, every commercial, that's giving a clear message that is hypersexual. and is hypersexual for a reason. So that's the kind of stuff what I'm talking about. That too falls under this guise of bodily autonomy. You don't have to. It gets to a point when that's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but along the line, you don't have to oppress people once you teach them how to and train them to oppress themselves.
Okay.
I'll just say that, right? And
Yeah.
so we see a lot of women internalizing their sexual oppression. So, and I don't know where that line is for every woman. Every woman has to determine that for themselves. I'm not going to accuse any woman of internalizing it. You answer that question for yourself.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Bakari, I'm right there with you. It's like I am so hypersensitive. You know, far be it from your brother LP to be the knuckle dragging caveman Neanderthal dinosaur. Mrs. LP and I would have some issues if that was
right.
She along with, I grew up in a household and in a family where I would say probably 80% of my upbringing was around women. So I've always had a very healthy respect for women and women's rights and different things like that. I always felt like I had to be the protector and all this stuff or whatever. This is part of the reason why I have these discussions, because there's not enough men that are having these conversations. If more guys like me who happen to be a first responder would have some of these discussions and have these interactions and come up with some action plans, because that's what we're going to close out with. What are some action plans that women can look for or formulate to not only seek help, but to maybe escape one of those situations, if possible?
Mm-hmm. Right. So those numbers that you gave in the beginning of the show are really important, especially the Arraigned website. If you are active, if you are an active victim, which is separate from a survivor says you're out of that situation, you're dealing with the after effects. But if you are still in the situation of abuse of any kind, those numbers and that you talked about earlier are critical. Get help to get out of the situation. My platform has to do more with survivors, people who have found their way out, but now trying to deal with the after effects of coming into their sense of thriving. They're tired of just surviving. They want to get on a track of thriving. And then that's what my work is about. And they can always find me, my website, RosennaBakari.com. Thanks for putting my books up there. Those are available. So get support. If you've been in any of these situations, full recovery alone is near impossible. It is near impossible. So I would say start looking at your resources about where you can get some help. So get help. Like, you deserve that. You're worth that. You're worth the help that you deserve to be better, to thrive, to live well.
Dr. Rosenna Bakari, I can talk to you every day and twice on Sunday. We're going to wrap it up here. I got one question for you, Dr. Bakari.
Mm-hmm.
If you could write a letter or an email to your younger self, little Rosenna, what would you say?
Oh, I have written those letters. Yes, I would say, and you're right. That's a great question for anyone to do, a great assignment for anyone to do. So for little Rosenna, I would just let her know how cool she is. That's what I would do. Man, like you were right on. Like, what you thought you were seeing was exactly what it was. And you were right on. Like, you had good vision. You knew, and you were right on, and you're pretty cool. And sorry that it wasn't better for you, but that you were right on.
I love that. Dr. Rosenna Bakari, 20 plus years of experience, 7 books written. I got her links on the screen here. I'm going to put them in the show notes. Go to Amazon. Can people order books off of your website? Like
RosennaBakari.shop instead of
.com.
.com. Yeah, .shop is where the books are.
Okay. Can they get autographed copies from that site?
If they order from me, they will be autographed. If they order from Amazon, they will not.
So 7 books written, 22 years and counting of teaching, 5 areas of expertise. We got empowerment for well-being, trauma-informed health guidance for well-being, human resource programming for well-being, teacher training for diversity, and counselor training for diversity. Dr. Rosenna Bakari, you are a wonderful scholar. You're a wonderful human being. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the sacrifice that you're doing, because you're a human being also. I'm sure this stuff weighs heavily on you. You didn't just pick this job because you put it in a lottery bowl and you picked out the ball and that's what came up for your career choice. This is heavyweighted stuff. And I always tell people, as a first responder, we're not single cell amoebas.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We bring this shit home with us every time. I always told Mrs. LP, I want to come home the same way I left.
That's right.
Happy and whole. But there's going to be times, because of the nature of the job, there's a lot of trauma involved. So, I might come home one day after a 48-hour fire shift, and you're telling me about your job, because she's a project manager. So she's telling me about people, deadlines and charts and graphs and SQL operations and all this stuff, whatever. And I said, you may ask me how was my shift, and I might be like, hey, I was not able to resuscitate this newborn twin that we worked on for an hour. And the mom was crying the whole way down to the room. God, please forgive me for everything that I've done in my life. Please bring my baby back. What do you do with those thoughts and all this stuff? So, and when we're talking about traumas, the child abuse cases that I've seen and had to report, I was mandated to report, I should say. Those things stick with you, because LP loves all the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate the work that you do from the clinical side, pre-hospital, as we call EMS. I appreciate the work that you're doing and the research that you continue to do to help us get back to our humanity, because that's my bottom line. Let's get back to our humanity.
Yes.
And the way that we do it is having dialogue with, and I preface it with, action plans, because Dr. Bakari, I always say, if we're not going to have action plans with the dialogue, I don't want to be part of it, because it just becomes trauma dumping, right? I'd rather sit on the couch, binge watching something on Netflix and picking the lint out of my belly button than be poured into some of these dialogue only conversations, because they don't do anything. They don't go anywhere. So I appreciate you, the work that you're doing. I want you to continue to be the great, world-renowned, respected Dr. Rosenna Bakari that I'm going to be tapping into more. Sarah introduced me to you. I love Sarah. She was on our podcast before. I don't know if you saw her interview, but we love her, and she speaks so highly of you. I was like, yeah, I got to meet Dr. Bakari. I just got to meet her. I love the picture of the two of you together on her Instagram.
Yeah.
And I just want to say to you, you got an open invite to come on here anytime to talk about any of these topics when you want to. So if something pops up, because I got the form, there's no censorship here. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about, as deep as you want to talk about, even from the religious perspective. If you want to go there and you say, you know what, I really want to just we got to talk about this. Okay, time, date, and place. That's all I need to know.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and let the people know in the show notes how they can get your books, your website, your Linktree information, your IG stuff. All of that will be posted in the show notes. For Dr. Bakari, I'm your brother LP. I want to say to all the listeners, we're going to combine this interview. It's going to be split up, but we're going to combine it in maybe 1 or 2 other pieces. So we'll have Leah Abraham join us for a continuation of Stigmas, Taboos, and Stereotypes, World Childhood, Domestic Violence, and Traumas. Before we close out the show, We always end with a missing person case. 99% of the cases that we cover are melanated men, women, and children. We want to bring the same media attention and energy to those that are black and brown. And we have a case that Mrs. LP, as she always does, sent to me. This is the case of a young man in Harris County, Georgia, named Christopher Tompkins. This story comes from YouTube. It is the All Things Crime TV, and this case comes from a book by a former detective named David Paulides. He wrote a series of books called Missing 411. This is a short story. I'm going to play the video and just take a listen to it.
Christopher Carlton Tompkins was born on December 28, 1981. Described as a happy, outgoing, and hard-working individual, 20-year-old Christopher was also a devout Christian who lived with his mother, Anna Mackenzie, in Ellerslie, Georgia, at the time of his disappearance. He worked for a surveying company as part of a four-man crew, a job he enjoyed. On the day he vanished, January 25, 2002, Christopher showed up for work at 8 a.m. and rode with a co-worker to their job site in a wooded area, near County Line Road in Harris County, Georgia. Chris and the three other surveyors were working in a line formation, spaced roughly 50 feet apart. The men stopped for a lunch break and then at approximately 1:30 p.m., resumed working. One of the surveyors was in the middle of a conversation with Chris when he looked away for a minute, turning his head briefly to check on something. When he looked back only seconds later, Christopher was inexplicably missing. His tools were still on the ground right where he had left them, but he was gone. None of his co-workers had seen or heard anything strange, so at first, they assumed he had simply walked into the woods to relieve himself. But after several minutes, when Christopher still hadn't returned, they began to search the immediate area. They found nothing. One of the surveyors phoned his wife to tell her that Christopher was missing and that they couldn't find him anywhere. Strangely, however, Christopher's mother wasn't informed that her son was missing until 4:15 p.m. Christopher Tompkins was soon reported missing and the official investigation into his disappearance began. The police quickly found a boot hanging from the top of a barbed wire fence in the wooded area near where Christopher was last seen. It was confirmed to belong to him. On that same fence, they also discovered a blue thread, presumably from Christopher's pants. Some sources report that his pants were found too, but it's unclear whether this is accurate or not. Coins, also believed to be his, were laying on the ground nearby. No blood or signs of a struggle were found. Without any forensic evidence or eyewitness reports, the investigation hit a standstill. However, 6 months later, his other work boot was found by a farmer on private property, less than 1 mile away. Nothing else belonging to Christopher has ever been discovered. In the absence of direct evidence of foul play or any other explanations, such as an animal attack or accidental injury, the authorities eventually closed Christopher Tompkins' case, coming to the rather puzzling conclusion that he had simply walked off to start a new life. His fellow surveyors have never been investigated as suspects in his disappearance, though one of them retained a lawyer immediately after Christopher went missing. Neither their identities nor the name of the surveying company has ever been released to the public. It is known, however, that Anna Mackenzie, Christopher's mother, knew and worked as a babysitter for the owner of the company. Additionally, one of the surveyors was convicted of an unrelated violent crime and given a long prison sentence just months after Christopher's disappearance. Christopher's boss reportedly said that he had been acting strangely leading up to his disappearance, but never elaborated on this ambiguous statement. However, Anna refuted this assertion about her son's behavior, saying that, "Chris lived with me and I saw him every day." There was neither strange behavior on his part nor any distress. Anna went on to say that she believed Christopher was a victim of foul play and that his co-workers know more than what they told to investigators. Given its association with the controversial missing cases, in which people have mysteriously vanished in the wilderness, a number of bizarre theories have risen up around it, including everything from alien abduction to Bigfoot. Sadly, Christopher Tompkins' case is no longer being actively investigated and there have been no further developments, but his remaining family and friends, as well as those who are familiar with his case, hope to one day have definitive answers about what happened to him on that January day in 2002.
The The case remains unsolved. If you have any information that could help close this case, contact the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 706-628-4211. Again, if you have any information that can help close the case of Christopher Tompkins missing for nearly 20 plus years, contact the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 706-628-4211. Reference agency case number 020125004 or NCIC case number M as in Mary -0821522620. Live in awareness, never live in fear. Keep your head on the swivel. Remember, any active violent incident can occur anytime, anywhere. I always say it's not a matter of if, but when and where an active violent incident is going to happen. That includes domestically, folks. That includes domestically, folks. Rule number 1, it includes domestically. Rule number 2, go back to rule number 1. So that's my spiel. I'm going to leave it at that. For Dr. Rosenna Bakari, I'm your brother LP. And in closing, as I always say to everybody, LP out.
Thanks, LP.